All right, so we're going to take a little bit of a break from all of the combat and battles and everything that we've been looking at, and we're going to sort of zoom out and look at how things have been playing out at home in the Union and in the Confederacy during the war. So we know at this point, the end of 1862, the last battle that we covered was Fredericksburg, and after the loss at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Lincoln is just doing horribly. The South is winning battle after battle, winning the war at this point. Lincoln's got multiple generals who he feels like doesn't know what they're doing. He doesn't really know what he's doing. And overwhelmingly, things just are not going well or in a positive direction for the Union. So Lincoln feels like he's got to do something to change the direction of how the war is playing out. So he does that thing, and that is writing the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect on January 1st of 1863. And what it does is the wording of the Emancipation Proclamation is it's very important the way that it's worded. Okay, I know that in elementary school and everything we call Abraham Lincoln the Great Emancipator, right? That's his nickname, the Great Emancipator, because of this document, because of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was supposed to free the slaves. That is not true. That is 100% false. And I don't know why that happened. And in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation freed not one single slave. And that was intentional. Had Lincoln actually meant to free any slaves, then he would have, but he didn't. So the Emancipation Proclamation literally says that it frees the slaves in the states in rebellion. What are the states in rebellion? That's the Confederacy, right? So the Emancipation Proclamation only applies to the Confederacy. So does that mean that all the slaves in the Confederacy are free? No, because the Confederacy is a different country. We can't pass a law about Canada saying now Canada has to vote, or not vote, but drive on the left side of the road. They don't have to listen to us. They're their own country. They are a sovereign nation. We do not have anything to do with their laws and government. And that's the same way. That's the same thing here. Lincoln is not the president of the Confederacy. He cannot free legally the slaves in the Confederacy. And he knew that. Now, what slaves can Lincoln free? Lincoln can free the slaves that are in the Union. There are plenty there. There are slaves in Missouri. There are slaves in Kentucky. There are slaves in Delaware. There are slaves in Maryland. But he doesn't do that. Why does he not free the slaves that he can free and quote unquote free the slaves in the states that he can't free? Well, Lincoln didn't really set out here to abolish slavery. There's a quote from Lincoln where he says, if I could end the war without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could end the war by freeing every slave, I would do it. He just wants to do whatever he has to do to preserve the Union. So the Emancipation Proclamation now, while it doesn't free a single slave, it is designed to do two things. Number one, change the motivations of the war. The war is not going to be about preserving the Union anymore. Now the war is about ending slavery. So while the war is not originally fought to end slavery, it is won to to end slavery, which is an important change here. He's trying to get people more emotionally invested in the outcome. The second thing that it's meant to do is guarantee that France and Great Britain will not get involved in the war and help the Confederacy. Basically, the thought process here is that France and Great Britain are both very anti-slavery, and if the Union is now fighting a war to end slavery, that means that the Confederacy is fighting a war to preserve slavery. Great Britain, being an abolitionist country, is not going to fight a war to help slavery. They're not going to do it. Even if they, don't care about the Union at all, they're not going to fight a war to end slavery, or if they're not going to fight a war to help keep slavery around. So the Emancipation Proclamation doesn't free any slaves, but it is meant to spark this new sort of feeling about slavery and abolition in the United States. So some people in the North are worried about it, actually, because they thought it would lead to a bunch of former slaves moving to the North, and it would increase competition for jobs. But overwhelmingly, people in the North do support it because they think that it's going to shorten the war. Abolitionists, on the other hand, absolutely hate the Emancipation Proclamation because they see the reality of it. They know that it doesn't free a single slave, and they think that that's sort of insulting. You know, Abraham Lincoln's the one man on the planet that has the power to end slavery in the United States, to end slavery in the Union, and he doesn't. He has these slaves at his in his reach that he can help, and he chooses not to because he doesn't want to piss off those states even more and push anyone else into secession. So he chooses preserving the Union over abolishing slavery here. That was his whole plan all along. So once the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect, we are going to see African Americans play an even larger role in the war, and African Americans always played a large role in the war, both for the North and the South. In the South, we have African Americans fighting with the Confederate military, or with the Confederate military. They're just doing non-combat jobs, though. So, I mean, like cooking, cleaning, driving, building, things like that. Those are jobs done by slaves in the military. Slaves also allowed for white men to fight in the military while still ensuring that work at home would be done. So having a slave ensures that your business or your farm or whatever is still gonna, you're still gonna have people running it and working it while you're, fighting in the army, or if you're drafted or whatever. In the Union, a lot of escaped slaves are going to be hired by the Union Army to serve as guides for invading forces. So if you were a runaway slave from Virginia, Ulysses S. Grant might want you to help him, to help guide his troops, so you can tell him where the high ground is, where the low ground is, your way around. A person with that type of knowledge can be very beneficial. Eventually, there's going to be a lot of African Americans joining the military in the Union. They serve in segregated units. Initially, the African American units are just used for labor and guard duty. Like I said, non-combat jobs, just like in the South. But by July of 1863, that is going to change, and they're going to get more involved in combat because Lincoln needs more help. So over 180 African Americans are going to serve in the Union Army. They're going to fight in over 200 battles, and over 40,000 black men are going to die in combat serving the Union during the Civil War. So life in the military in the Civil War is not a glamorous one by any means. Serving in the Civil War is still obviously extremely difficult. Disease is really one of the biggest problems. Disease in the Civil War kills twice as many men as battle does. So anytime you hear me give you a stat on how many men died in a particular battle, you can just go ahead and know that if I say, 8,000 men died at this battle, you can just be like, well, that's basically 16,000 people dying of the measles or the mumps or smallpox or whatever. Diseases like that swept through camps because soldiers were kept in such, sort of tight quarters. Soldiers are also getting dysentery, cholera, typhoid fever, things like that those come from poor sanitation or drinking contaminated water, dirty water. Sometimes doctors will go days without washing their tools during the Civil War. We don't know nearly as much about sanitation and germs in the 1860s as we do today. So, I might cut off someone's leg and let I'm just whipping through all these amputations and use the same saw to cut off someone's leg as I do someone's arm, and that can lead to the spread of disease as well as infection and a lot of other problems. Gunshots are also going to cause some problems. We've got a new type of gun and a new type of bullet, which leads to a change in how a gunshot wound actually affects your body. And with the new Civil War technology, gunshots actually usually shatter your bone, and they also carry with it dirt and disease, which can cause infection. But when your bone shatters, the bone fragments can tear through muscle and flesh, and they can ricochet and, pierce your lungs, get into your heart, and do all other sorts of damage there. So in 1861, the Union founds the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and the U.S. Sanitary Commission is basically designed to try to prevent a lot of the deaths from occurring. So they provide nurses and ambulance drivers. They collect and distribute food and supplies. They inspect hospitals and offer advice on how to keep it sanitary and keep it clean. But a lot of that disease is actually going to come, like I said, from camp. 75% of a soldier's time is spent at camp, and camp is happening in really horrible conditions. They've got overcrowded tents, and a lot of men are being forced to sleep on the ground. At camp, food was usually available, and it was okay, but when they were on the march and moving from one place to another, it was absolutely horrible. So overwhelmingly, it's just pretty difficult at camp. Now, that is, while you're in your military camp, while you're at your base. Other camps that we have during the Civil War are POW camps. So POW stands for Prisoners of War. Prisoners of war are people captured by the enemy. So, Union soldiers captured by the Confederacy would be sent to a POW camp, and Confederate soldiers captured by the Union would be sent to a POW camp. So there's going to be lots of camps for POWs on both sides, but I want you to know one for the South and one for the North. In 1863, something changes that is going to cause the amount of POWs for both sides to really start to increase, and that's going to be the Emancipation Proclamation. When Lincoln passes the Emancipation Proclamation, the South is furious, and they respond by declaring that any black soldiers captured by the Confederate Army would be sold into slavery or they would be executed. So the Union is mad about that, so they refuse to let any POWs go at all. So if they're not letting any POWs go, then the South's not going to let any POWs go. So they both just start racking up huge numbers of POWs, and so the camps are going to get overcrowded, so they got to start building more. So the two camps that you need to know, the first one is in Andersonville, Georgia. The camp is called Andersonville, and it's built in 1864. And like I said, it's built to house a large number of POWs. It's built to hold 10,000 POWs. By July, there are 30,000 there, so it is going to be extremely overcrowded. And because of that, disease is going to be rampant, and this is just going to be an absolutely awful place to be, equivalent almost to a concentration camp. And about 100 men will die every day at Andersonville. That's how bad it is. The camp in the Union is in the city of Elmira in New York. The camp is called Elmira. And Elmira was built, it was somewhat overcrowded, but not nearly as overcrowded as Andersonville is. And the main problem in Elmira, though, is not overcrowding, it's food. During the war, when Elmira is built, the Union restricts all their POWs to bread and water only. So some prisoners are starving, literally, and they are being forced to eat rats, and some of them start starving to death, and it's just really awful. And eventually the death rates in Elmira will reach to be the same rate as Andersonville. They're going to be about 100 a day, which is pretty high death rates for POW camps.